The other place was packed, and I think that's why the move. So anyway, let's get back to it. All right, so to recap, it's pretty. Hello World really only took me about 5 minutes to implement, but we had to talk about architecture. Otherwise, this just didn't make any sense at all because it just would have been a tool fest. It would have been nothing with really any meaning or context. So that's why we went there. So first of all, let's run this. Like I said, I'm going to show you basically nothing, but let's run this and see if it works over here in this environment. That I got when I just created the PhoneGap application. This isn't the prototype we just did. I'll show you the prototype in a minute. But I want to walk you through what we have out here. This really does look a lot like this looks an awful lot like just like your iPhone, because it's supposed to. It's an emulator. So in other words, if I wanted to get rid of this, I just press down, it starts to wiggle, I hit the X, and then it just asks me if I want to delete. So this is, and then to get rid of the wiggling, hit the button down there, and we're back. And then it tries to make it look like it's, a mobile carrier, and it actually is fairly accurate with the time. So this is a reasonable emulation. This at least lets you know whether your app is going to work when you get to the App Store. It's a very good indicator. You really do need to run with an emulator if you're going to be successful. And regardless of whether you're doing iPhone development, Android development, so I would suggest getting this up on the different platforms. So this is obviously skewed towards iOS, but go do the same instructions for your operating system for Android and for the other major platforms and test this cross-platform and make sure it's going to work and then correct problems. So it's the same type of thing like with cross-browser issues. Make sure that you do not have cross-platform issues with your app. There shouldn't be any as long as you follow pretty standard HTML5 stuff. But you never really know. Really, it's usually going to be around rendering. Just don't do anything too crazy, and it should work. And like I said, the initial app I did was running in Android, and later on we just did it in iPhone, and there were no issues. In this case, I'm doing this on my Mac exclusively, but I'm pretty sure it'll run nicely on the on other applications. So now I'm bringing up my SimplyToast application. It doesn't do anything, but this is just to show you that there are no real issues. I was able to take the prototype I just showed you that I built in just pure HTML5, and I was able to port it to the directory structure of PhoneGap and get it to run. But there is some porting work to be done. I don't know if I've got a slide for that, but I want to show you this because there's nothing free in the sense of in terms of, it's free in terms of cost, but there's work that has to be done. So this is not without effort, okay? So I'm not going to tell you this is wonderful, this is perfect. It just has no effort involved. There is some work that you'll have to do. So for example, when I went and generated this, the directory structure that RIB application did for me was different than the directory structure for PhoneGap. And then I had to make file system adjustments. I had to make adjustments in my HTML so I could find the JavaScript and the CSS. Yeah. All right, so I just want to show you a couple of things. So here's the prototype that I had generated, the original prototype. Okay, and so I did the tree command, and this is going to be the prototype that I created from that web application, where I generated all that nice little set of web pages. And here's their directory structure. So they have index.html. Notice there's no www because it does not know about PhoneGap. And then underneath it's got source, CSS, and then under CSS it's got the two jQuery mobile CSS files. Under lib, it's got the jQuery JavaScript files. And these are the core things that you need, but this is not in PhoneGap, so you have to go do this in PhoneGap. So I'm going to go over and I'll show you what I had to do. So over here, I had to port everything to the www directory. Here's my index.html. And then I had to just start changing a little bit on my just how I access the style sheets. I had to move the files physically over. The one thing I did have to do also is I had to include Cordova.js. That's the magic that makes PhoneGap happen. So anytime you do this, you'll just have to know that. But you would see that in the generated hello world file that I just did. You would see that and you would just copy those pieces over. That's just something you have to know in order for this to go deploy. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Now, somebody had a question during the break just about, it was really cool, it was about Razor and CSHTML files. I don't know if that gentleman's still here or not, or if he...
Yeah, the gentleman is here.
Ah, sorry, I couldn't see you. It's bigger here. So you want to talk about that, what you're trying to do? And
I think we'll skip on it. We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about it offline? Okay, cool. So those are the things that you have to do. You have little environmental changes that you have, subtle environmental changes. You've got to copy files over to certain directory structures. So I would suggest starting with that little starter PhoneGap application, looking to that, looking at the index.html, what JavaScript files does it include? It'll be this Cordova file. And then, as soon as you know about that, copy those pieces out, delete the file, copy your files in, make sure that you push things under the www directory structure, and make sure that your references back to your style sheets and your JavaScript files work. So test that out, make sure it's going to hit it. Usually when things don't come up right, it just means you just missed a file, or maybe you just missed a directory structure. So that's one thing you're going to have to be able to do and figure out. So as I've said, this is not perfect. And the one thing I am doing is I did copy over the information about the viewport. The viewport settings really is the elixir that makes a web page show nicely within show nicely as a mobile app. And I'm not going to talk about this too much, other than this. In general, this statement here in the meta tags of the header is part of responsive web design. So that tells it to scale to the screen size and to fit, instead of just going all over the place. Without this, it just doesn't look very nice. And again, you would see that in the generated index.html file that came with the not even vanilla PhoneGap application. Okay, so that worked. Yay. Let's move on. Okay, so what do I like about PhoneGap? And I'm going to be as honest with you as I can. Here's what I like about this. I like the quick setup, because even though we talked for about an hour, it only took me about maybe 5 minutes to run the create, build, and run. That was very, very simple, very straightforward. It just ran, and it worked. That was just great. And also, I love the new 2.0 command tools. They're easy. I don't have to go into a particular IDE. It doesn't care. I mean, there's a little bit of knowledge. I have to download something, but I don't have to get within that GUI application at all. So that's good. The emulator's nice. It's pretty realistic. It looks good. And this whole thing just works. That's great. Here's what I don't like. Here's the issues I had to go through. The IDEs, so I had to, in 1.0 where I started, I think it was 1.8.1.9, that's where I had to go through the whole situation of, I had to actually open up an IDE. In my case, it was Eclipse. Nothing wrong with Eclipse. And Java. I've done Java for many, many years. I love Java. And how you set it up was you had to install you have Eclipse plugin, so there was an Android Eclipse plugin. And you may still have to do that. I think you still have to do that by hand, but you're not having to run it. I had to actually be in the browser. I mean, not within the browser, within the IDE to do all of this. Anything I was doing had to be within the IDE. That's where the examples all took you. And the other problem was, going back, I didn't even list this, I just remembered this 2 seconds ago. When I first generated the Hello World application, it didn't work. Not in this version, but in 1.x. And so that was a little bit, that was frustrating. What it did is it created an empty www directory with no index.html, and it just broke. And then it just said, then in the documentation it said, oh, you need to add a file. I'm like, well, if you know how to do that, then why don't you do that? Why am I stuck trying to figure this out? So there were just a number of things that were that were difficult in 1.0, but I had to get this application done. I overcame it. 2.0, from what I've seen, is much cleaner, much nicer. First of all, it generated that index.html, and I don't have to know too much about the IDE. However, I would say that this is a bit of architectural bleed through because of the fact that I still do have to know about the directory structure, in this case of Xcode. And I still have to know the directory structure of Eclipse/Android type projects. So each time you make a change to a file, well, this may not fit your directory structure. Imagine you're trying to actually do something cross-platform. So I've got my iOS setup and directory structure. I've got my Android set of directory structure and setup. Now, how likely is iOS and Android to actually have the same directory structure? Not likely. And then, of course, there's your own project directory structure. So my thought to overcome all of this, I don't know how you do this in Microsoft, but I think in Linux I could probably do soft links to just hook everything together and just make it see it that way. That might overcome the problem. The other thing I can think of is more automated build scripts that can just copy and port. That'd be better because it would be cross-platform. So I hate to say this, but maybe something like either Ant if you're kind of Java-centric, or maybe something like Node and Volo or Node and Grunt if you're JavaScript-centric. That would be my solution. So you'd have to write some specialized scripts to do that kind of cross-porting. But really, there's no other way that I know of than what I just showed you by hand. So then that led to some problems because I was on the project, and guess what? Well, I have two directory structures now. So you can imagine the confusion that created. So if one of my developers is in the IDE, what happens if he makes a change in his IDE, but he forgets to copy that changed file back to the directory structure that we're using for our version control? So every single time you make changes, you've got to make sure to copy it back over and then do your check-in. That's inconvenient. So that's why I would really like to either have a standardized directory structure, maybe PhoneGap can do that for us, or they could do something where it's a bit more normalized. Maybe what we have to do is just put in some standards, like we always set up. Well, this is where the JS files go. This is where the CSS files go. What have you? But I'm just saying there's got to be something a bit better, and maybe there's some custom tools. Maybe either Node or Ant can help us with that, and maybe somebody will publish that. So that's one thing I would love to see changed. But believe me when I tell you that 1.0 to 2.0 was a huge, huge improvement in usability. But it still has a ways to go. So I'm not going to tell you this is perfect, because it is not perfect. But it does help a lot. And the other thing I would like to do, like I was saying, is I'd like to see some tie back to some type of automated build tools, like a Hudson or a Jenkins or Travis, something. And there really isn't anything out there. You have to probably write your own. You have to set up to have it call build and then run or something like that to go call your to put this through its paces and to actually build your application and then go deploy it. I can't think of any other way because, again, a continuous integration environment is a continuous loop. It's just scripts. It just runs scripts. There's no, oh, stop, and now let me go type something on the command line or type something in a GUI. That's not going to work. So there's definitely some gaps to fill to make this really clean. But it's definitely better than it was, and it needs work. All right, like I said, I think we're going to be really good on time, so we'll probably get out a little bit early if that's okay with you guys. So we're going to cover implementation, and we're going to wrap up with security. So here's some of the implementations I had to do in my application, and this really applies. So we're now out of the realm of really PhoneGap, and now we're talking about just plain old HTML5 with just JavaScript and style sheets. And these are some of the things that I went through and problems I had to solve. So in my case, I had to do some certain things around how to call REST. I had to set up configuration for my application. I had to do some domain objects. Of course, that'll vary wildly based on what you're doing for an MVC framework or lack thereof. So it changes completely. So that's going to depend on your architecture. But note that you will have to do some type of domain object somewhere, or you should, because, well, I think the MVC frameworks kind of really pretty much imposed this. I didn't have an MVC framework, so I had to make up my own that made some sense to us and that would work. And then, of course, we'll talk about web storage and session management, because there are some things that you can do, some things that you would definitely do, some things you wouldn't do. And these are some of the guidelines that I have. And again, if you guys have other ways of doing it, that's perfectly reasonable. There's many, many ways to make this go. So first of all, I'm going to show just a little bit about the RESTful URIs. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the design of how you design a RESTful API, because that's my talk on Friday, and if I talk about it now, I won't be able to talk about it then. So I don't want to do that. So here we go. So my API, is so my base API is api.simplytoast.org. And to get all the members, I say members, and then I do a get. I do members with member ID to get a single member. And I say members, member ID with a put to update. Then for create, I'm just going to do a post. That's typical. I mean, there's sometimes when people will create with a put and update with a post, but that's crazy stuff. Normally, this is what people are expecting. And then, of course, you can delete the member by using the delete. And I will show you a simple RESTful API that I've created last night. That's pretty simple to use. Okay, so I keep coming back to Node. I can't get away from it because all my cool tools that I want to set up without a lot of code work there. So Node.js is simply server-side JavaScripting. You don't need Node to do REST, okay? I'm just going to show you this because this was the fastest way to get an example running. This is faster for me than Java, faster for me than Ruby on Rails, and this was just to set up a demo, okay? So let's sort of just paint the picture here. I love using Ruby on Rails for REST. I love using Java for REST. I know that WCF in .NET is excellent, so I'm not denigrating or saying bad things about any of those platforms by any means, and I am not saying that this is better. But I was doing this, I don't know when I was doing this. It was late at night or early in the morning sometime, and I didn't have a lot of time. And I needed to set this up very quickly, and I didn't want to write any code. And I still wanted a RESTful API. So you think maybe that's impossible. Well, no, I did it. I just researched it and I found it. There's a thing called sales.js. So this probably doesn't show up too nicely on this screen, but just Google for sales.js. This has kind of got the similar feel to Ruby on Rails. You generate controllers, you generate models, you're generating scaffolding. Okay? And at the back end, it can talk to various NoSQL databases. It can talk to MongoDB. I don't know if it talks to Couch. I think you can, but there's built-in connectors, I know, for MongoDB, and there's a built-in connector for Postgres and MySQL. So it's all baked in there. So it's a similar flavor to Ruby on Rails, but this is for Node. So you're doing JavaScript, you're generating things, you're starting up things within Node, and I'm firing this up without any code. I've bypassed a lot of things. This is, again, hello world. And then it's up to you guys and up to me to take this base example and fill in the details. But I can show you a pretty simple example that I set up that didn't require any code, and I can do basic gets and deletes with this. And I think even a post. So here's the demo. Now before I go here, I want to walk you through. Now sales.js is a Node module. So just like a gem in Ruby on Rails, just like a Maven repo. It's the same kind of idea. You have these servers out on the internet with the code. They're basically code registries, code repositories. They follow a certain protocol. It's always npm install. And in this case, since I'm doing a global install with a -g, I have to do sudo in Linux or on bash because I didn't give myself full root access everywhere. I suppose I could, but I didn't want to change up too much of the operating system for this, so I kept it simple. So I'm just bypassing security temporarily so I can do this install. I'm setting myself up as root. Do the install and get it done. That's it. Then I'm creating the new application. I did that already. I've got a test sales project. I'm going to go in, and I'm just going to say sales lift. That is your command that starts the server. So this starts a Node application with your, and then you have to do But then to generate actual models, views, models, and controllers, I say sales generate member. So member is the part. So that's going to create a model and a view. Model and a controller. And these are empty. They do almost nothing. They're just plain old empty. They've got nothing in them. But this would enable me to put anything I want into a document. So let me show you how this works. It's pretty cool. And again, I'm going to lie because I'm not 29. But that's okay. If you believe it, that's good. It is a plugin to Google Chrome. And this enables me to do more than, because normally you can do a get using a web page, just your plain old web page, and you can do JSON. That's just you can get a JSON response. It's all lovely, but you can't do a post, a put, an update. You can't do a post, a put, or a delete. So I need to get a nice RESTful client. There's a couple of good ones, and one of them is called Advanced REST Client, and Mozilla also has a very nice REST client as well. So I set this up just so I could begin to start testing the app. Okay, so there's no response. I am down. So let me fire up the server, and we'll get this going. Sorry about that. And again, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but what I'm trying to do is have a testable back end. Because remember, the mobile application is just dumb. It's just calling RESTful endpoints. So I want to set up a simple set of RESTful endpoints that I can just call and keep that standard so I can start testing, doing automated testing and unit testing with my mobile application without having to change any client code. This way it doesn't really care what it's talking to as long as it's getting some data, as long as the RESTful API call works, and as long as it's getting back data in an expected format. So that's all I'm trying to do here. Okay, so it says it started. Let's give it a try. And I'm just going to hit this real briefly. I'm just going to say member. And there should be nothing in here. I'm not going to get a failure, but I'm not going to get anything either. Actually, I did get something. I don't know why it's doing that. Well, anyway, let's go and delete. I'm going to clear out. I've got something that obviously has persisted. So I assume what happened is it's got a it's not just storing things in memory. Sales is storing something on a flat file someplace by default, and that's why this is still here. So let me go do a delete and just clear this out. So I'm going to say I want to delete member 5. I'm going to hit the delete, and let's see what we get back. So that returned it. Let's see if we're clear. No, yeah. So let's. Sorry, I hit that wrong. Yeah, I got nothing. I've got nothing now, so I'm clean. So let me show you how I'm creating this. This is pretty cool. So I'm going to go back to my slide for a minute. And okay. We're going to paste in some parameters. I'm going to do a post. And I'm also going to I'm going to treat this like a form. That's what sales want. So it's not JSON. It's just like an HTTP form post. So you're going to use just straight HTML style parameters. So first name equals Tom. And then, of course, we separate the second parameter by saying age equals 29. We're going to hit the button. And it just created this file. Notice the time. So this is pretty fresh at this point. 12:18. Oh, have we swapped hours? Right? I don't know. Anyway, I don't know how it's getting that time, but this is what it just created. So now if I go do a search on member, just go back to this. I do a get. I'm going to see first name of Tom, age of 29, what I just put in. Now I'm going to just delete it out and clear out. All right, so I've hit the delete, and now I'm just going to go ahead and just hit the send. I'm going to go back and send this. Okay, and now let's just do a list. And it should just try to look for that one. And it shouldn't find it. Not found. Okay, so I just put it through its paces. And sales, so this is an app that does nothing, but yet it does quite a lot, because what it's doing is it's generating a simple RESTful interface for you. And let me show you the code that was generated. When I said sales generate model, there's nothing in here. It's just, this is bizarre. But let me show you what it does. And all it's depending on is my inputs. So I have to go seed the data with some inputs. So I have to give it some structure, or I can possibly just give it structure through the actual input file. Okay, I got to open this up. And so where this is going to store this, it's going to, I think, put this in the assets. No, not assets. It's going to be, yeah, here we go, models and controllers. And then, so here's the controller. I'm going to just open this up with TextMate. You can see that okay? I'll bump it up the size. There's really nothing in here. It's just creating an empty controller. So I can pretty much, and it just knows enough, just the overall housing, to go call the model. So this is like hello world for sales. There's a lot more to sales than this. I could actually put logic in the controller. But I chose not to, just to show what I can do with doing almost nothing. And again, we'll bring up member.js. This is the actual model. And in real life, I would probably connect this up on the back end to a NoSQL database or a SQL database. And again, it's just comments. There's nothing in here. So I supplied the structure when I did the post, and it just took whatever I gave it. But this gets you past a lot of things. And again, I spun this up in about 5 minutes without any real work. So with that, I can actually start, once I get hello world on the client, hello world on the server, I know my overall runtime works. I know I can connect to things. Once I get that, I'm not going to show the AJAX call to hook to this because I didn't get that far, but it'd be an easy call to make. Just get JSON with the API of localhost port 1337. All I'd have to do is make that post I was just doing from that GUI, from the REST client. And that's all I'd have to do, and I'd have full connectivity. That's not a lot of work, but that gives you a full almost a full end-to-end. And you could set this up probably within an hour or less time. That's pretty cool. You're getting a lot of infrastructure for not much work. And then, of course, I would suggest, well, if you don't know Node, go study it. And obviously sales, get to know the technology. There's going to be a lot more meat to the controller than that. That was shallow. That was just to show what you could do without doing much. And then, of course, the model, you'll be hooking up to some back end. You'll be hooking up to like NoSQL databases or SQL, and you're going to have to use their driver, because there's a driver kind of connector just like you would have in JDBC or with I think whatever .NET does. It's Entity Framework, something, or ODBC. What? ADO.NET. Apologies. So that's my world that I've been playing in. So I've been learning a lot of this stuff. But like I said, you can do the same thing with Rails. You can do the same thing with .NET. That should be pretty easy to do. Whatever, pick the framework of your choice. You can do the same thing with Java. Do whatever makes you happy. I didn't have the luxury of doing what I wanted. I didn't have enough time to put this all together. So I spun things up that I could put together quick, really fast. Does that make sense? Again, time constraints. So that's constraints on the architecture. All right, so we're almost done with. Then another alternative is has anyone heard of Getty? It's another MVC framework. They claim to be the original MVC framework for Node. So, and the other thing about this is I think these are based on other things. I think it goes Node, then Connect, then Express, and then on top of the boilerplate. I would say get to know Node, get to know Express, and then pick an MVC framework, a Node of your choice for the server side, if you're going to do some server-side JavaScript. Your question? Okay. All right. So when we first started coding, we had this, obviously you would write something like this. From your AJAX call, you're going to make a thing, you're going to say get JSON, here's my local host, 1337 members, I've got my success function, and I'm processing the response. That's nice in demo world. What happens in real life when I have my own local box, then I've got to deploy this on a development box, then I've got maybe QA, maybe staging, maybe production, and then user acceptance test. How is this going to work for you? Not very well. Not well at all, actually, because you've just hard-coded it. And so this has nothing to do with PhoneGap. It's really more on the HTML5 and JavaScript side. You need to do some kind of configuration, so that you can easily swap it out. And here was sort of a stripped-down version of what I did on a project. I'm not running the code this time, but I'm going to at least show you, walk you through some of the code that I did. Called util. I've got one member of this called config. I've got a port number. So all this I'm going to factor out. Now this isn't perfect. This isn't perfect, but this at least gets it into one place rather than in multiple pages. So here I've got localhost, and this is all going out to my various out to my various URIs. This is good. This is my base URIs. So I'm going to pass in the path, and so then I do the magic. I'm going to look up. It's an associative array. I can go and say, okay, well, based on this .config, in this case it's hard-coded to local, I'm going to go get this textual value. Then I'm going to say localhost, in this case, colon, then pop in the port, do a slash, and then a slash to the path. Now, how can we make this better? So I've gotten it from hard-coded in n places down to 1. What would I do? Well, you can do a thing called templating. Okay? So I could do this, and I could use a Jade template within Node. I could use something, that would be one solution. Or perhaps, if you're doing Ant, you could do that as well. So just templatize this one little piece, and you could pass these two properties in just on the command line, or maybe you have a separate props file that just points it in one way or another. And that way you've completely factored it out of your application. So does that make some sense? Okay. Web storage. There's actually 4 different types, and again, this is choices that you have to make. We're first going to talk about local and session storage. And these are really nothing more than key value pairs. So if you're familiar with Java, it's like it's similar to just a list. You're getting items, you're setting items. It's key value pairs, and the values can only be strings. Now imagine my surprise when I started using HTML5, and I'm trying to do JavaScript objects, and I wanted to cache some of my objects into the session storage. It didn't work very well. It didn't work at all, actually. I had to stringify the object, so I converted it to JSON text with a key, and then stuffed it in that way. So that's your trick. And then coming back out, you do a JSON parse. And I cover that in my JSON talk, and I'll also be covering a little bit more of that in my JavaScript unit testing talk in a couple of days. So you'll see a bit more depth on that. But that's really the only way you can get data in and out. It does not speak objects. It's dumb, but that's okay. You can work with it. Now, this is pretty much supported at this point by all modern browsers. It's pretty cool. Now, the real difference between this and cookies is a couple things. Well, cookies has the size, I think it's like a 4K limitation, something like that. And also, in this case, web storage is not shared with the server. So that differs from cookies as well. All right, so let's take a look at the API. This is pretty straightforward. You have just set item with the key and value, that will set an item. But notice here, I can also call it this way. It's like an associative array. So those are alternate ways of calling session storage. And the same thing with getting an item, I do it with a key. I can also use it this way and just use an associative array type call. Remove item, very straightforward, just call it with the key, it's done. So this looks like I can't have multiple values for the same key. I have to have unique. So this is what this is telling me just from looking at the API. And then I can find a key by just doing a lookup on the key name. And finally I can do a clear, which is essentially flushing the cache. I can wipe it out. There are other honorable mentions like IndexedDB and WebSQL. And of course, I think I talked to somebody about app cache, and that's for prefetching pages with concurrent AJAX calls. So if you have, and I'm not going to get into that, probably Scott Davis covers that, maybe Venkat covers that. This is the edge of what I know. I'm doing more enterprise side things, but these are things that you can look at to help you. So I can't make a judgment call whether I like IndexedDB or WebSQL better, worse than traditional web storage, because again, at the time, I understood local storage and session storage. That's all I knew, and I went with it and made it work. So part of architecture is going with what you know. You can't know everything all at the same time. Do as much research as you can, but really look at just your overall, you got to hit a timeline. So I chose session storage because it's not persistent. The session closes when the app closes. Pardon. And so in my case, I had to have that. That was an architectural constraint. I had to store a token that I was getting back from the server, which represented my session. It was a unique session. It gave me access to everything after I logged in. So I obviously didn't want to store that. That's bad. You don't want to put that. And I'm certainly not going to store the username and password anywhere. I want that to be transitory data. So I'm going to use the temporary storage I'm going to use temporary storage like this for sensitive data. The only gotcha to this would be that what happens if I'm in the middle of my session, and then a bad guy with a gun comes and hits me over the head and steals my phone. Well, I know, but I know that sounds stupid. But I had to answer questions like this with the security guys. It was fun. I'll tell you more about that on Friday. But you get into these discussions, and so they tell you to shorten the session. So when they put timeouts like on the session, so I had to put a timer on the session, and then when the timer expired, and it would expire after a very, very long period of time, like a day. At least it would knock down fraudulent behavior, couldn't prevent it. And it was designed so that it would at least try to limit open sessions. But obviously you didn't want it closing too often because that would annoy the user. So our session length was a day regardless of whether people were using it or not using it. And they would just redirect you to the login page and it would flush the cache with that session storage clear. So it did things like that. And so that was the moral of the story, and that's where some of the things I had to do to go secure my application, again, in my banking app. Now, I would choose local storage in certain cases, too, because in this case, this is persistent. It does remain on disk after the app closes, so it's similar to a cookie in that manner. However, it'll let you go up to 5 megabytes, theoretically. Some browsers may be 10, but you can't guarantee it. But don't put sensitive data out there unless you're going to encrypt. But still, you're really opening things up because with mobile devices, you don't know where they've been, you don't know who's handling them. I wouldn't put anything sensitive out there, nothing. So it could be things like maybe, I register for the application and I store maybe the first name of the user. So the next time it'd be friendly and say, "Hello, Tom." And it might save your time zone, little niceties like that. But don't put anything more out there than that, because not even role information, nothing. You really want to be very tight on this. Oh, and one other thing I did with session, going back to that, is I also stored user role information in session. And we'll get to that when I talk about role-based access control. So I didn't choose, at that point, IndexedDB, WebSQL, and app cache. And that was, again, due to my knowledge and skill set at the time. And I really didn't have, my application was pretty simple. I didn't have to worry about the prefetching. But if you have heavy constraints in terms of performance, you got lots of pages, you might, and some of these pages get high traffic, you might want to use app cache to prefetch the key pages where everybody's going immediately, so you've got them. And then you're not waiting for that page to load. So that is a good place to use it. All right, so I'm going to do another demo. And I'm going to talk about just, this is going to show session storage and just demo it for you. So I'm going to go into Google Chrome, and I'm going to go bring up the web page that shows this. And I know I should have a unit test, but I'm sorry, it's the end of the day. So let's go through this. All right. So here is the member session test, and I'm going to just run this for you. And I'm doing horrible things in here. I'm actually going to I'm doing alerts, and let me show you the code that backs this. This will make sense. I'm going to walk you through it. The conditional, the member session.html. All I'm going to do is a series of pop-ups. So I'm here, right here. It's saying an original member in my pop-ups, and I know this is bad code, by the way. Don't do this at home. So I'm doing this. I'm then going to say, here's my member that I have initially set up. And going back to the demo. This is just a member I've instantiated. I'm glossing over the details of object instantiation in JavaScript. Again, we're covering that Thursday. And then I'm going to go do an alert. And then I'm doing a session.setItem. Okay? This is the magic. So I give it a key of member, and then I pass in the member object. And then the next alert will say member from session. It's then going to do a get item on member, pull it in, and then do an alert. So the data will come right back to me. But trust me, it did make it into session. And I will show you this within the Google Chrome tools. So here's the member from session. Here it goes. So it's coming back. And just to prove there's no tricks up my sleeve, I will go into the Google Chrome tools, and we'll go to the JavaScript console. So let's go to Resources, Session Storage, File. And here is my nice little key value pair, just as I stored it. And this should stay for the length of the session and no more. When I kill the browser, this should be gone. So has anyone been working with session storage or local storage, anything like that? So how is that? What were some of the things that you guys were doing with it?
What we have provided a sync option.
Right. Yeah, that's a great use, and I failed to mention that. But yes, that is an awesome use of local session. That's great. I mean, local storage. Sorry. That's good, because what that does is that gives you the freedom of being completely detached. And I didn't have that requirement in my application, but yeah, there's definitely a need. I had another architecture I had to design later on where it did require offline storage, and that would have made all kinds of sense for that. So that's another great reason to use it. Anything else, sir? Offline storage. It's a good thing. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to show you the rest of the code. But let me walk you through this. So here was the running code. So I have member4.js, and that's just an object. I don't think I'm going to go into that. And then just session is just a very simple wrapper. I have a thing just set. I just wrap all the calls. Mostly because I didn't want my developers having to deal with session storage directly. These guys are pretty junior. I don't know if this is good or bad. Where I'd like to go with this is I'd like to see something that does that would wrap local and session storage for me. Even wrap things like that would wrap things like IndexedDB, all of web storage, and I could just make it choose. I could tell it, well, this is where I want it to go, unless, configure it to go a certain way. And then if I wanted to maybe store it differently, I could choose a different way of, I could tell it, oh, I want to do web SQL, or I want to do IndexedDB, I want to do local storage or session storage. And there's a product called LawnChair. I don't know if I'm going to list that or not, but LawnChair, when I say LawnChair, I mean the, it's a chair that you use outside. LawnChair, LAWN chair.js. Look at that. Look at Depot, DEPOT.js. These are some frameworks that are out there, but they were more complicated than I needed for my particular application. But they're very sophisticated, and you may find them more kind of professional grade. Is anybody using any wrappers around local or session storage, like just third party? Okay, so I take that as a no. All right, let's move on. All right. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about security. So the real two things I had to deal with were login, logout, and then role-based access control. So initially, and we'll talk more about this in the Restful API talk I'm doing on Friday, but how do you guys feel about these APIs? I'm saying they're awful. What do you guys think? Why good, why bad? Anybody? Okay. So I'm going to tell you why I think it's terrible. Because it really, log in and log out are verbs. You typically do not put verbs in a RESTful API. You put in nouns, people, places, things. So I've just kind of, I've skewed, so the initial cut at this when I was doing my login service was kind of this way, but that's just too servicey. And really when you're doing REST, you're talking about a resource. A resource is a thing. It's not a. It's like a person. It's a relationship. It's think of your entities, but not entities that you're storing in the database. It's more the entities that mean something in your domain, in general. And this is what you're exposing out to your clients at a very high level. But it won't be the same domain objects you've got in your middle or your back end. But in general, you don't use verbs in your API. This is very poorly thought through. And I had to work with my team to get this structured correctly. And so what I did, or what I'm choosing and moving more towards is more of a noun-based. So this is user session. Notice now, instead of one URI, instead of the two paths, log in and log out, I've only got one. And so when I log in, I'm going to do, well, essentially that shouldn't be a get, that should be a post. But I'm going to do a post to go create the session. And then I'll do a delete to clear out the session. This would be on server side someplace. And this would hold just things like the users, probably just their authentication token and probably their roles if I needed to get back at that sometime. But this way I've kept it under one URI and I'm using the verbs, had I typed this right, correctly within the API. And I will talk more deeply about RESTful APIs on Friday. So hopefully some of you can come to that. All right, so role-based access control. Has anybody had to do anything role-based access control out on a client app, on one of these mobile apps? Okay. Well, we had to back in the old days. If you guys can remember, like Java EE, JSPs. People have coded with JSPs, yes? ASPs, ERB files in Ruby. So you get the idea, the view part, kind of the served up pages that come from the back end. With that, you have full access to your back end. You can get, essentially indirectly, you can get to the security model of your security domain. Well, it's gone. You don't have that anymore. What if you have to have a page where you have some content that belongs only to one type of user, but like let's say someone who's lesser privileged can only see maybe 2 widgets on a page, then the person with full access can see all 4 or 5 widgets on the page. How do you do that? Well, the answer, we looked around, and this is what we found. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but here's a sample. I don't have running code on this, but I'll show you what I did and see what you think. Sets up some metadata for my roles. So I have a method called check roles, and I just to make sure that the role that I passed in is in my roles array. That's all I'm doing, yes or no. And then and check at least one roles. I'm getting an array, a group of roles. Actually, I'm getting a string. And I'm going to pass in, I'm going to loop through that array. And I'm going to check to see at least one of those roles has a match with what I'm looking for. And then down here are my roles. In this case, it's member app president, member app VP of membership. So I'm saying that I only want to look at, now this is hard-coded. This would be normally the data that you would see coming back from the server. But I wanted to put this all into one place so you could see this code in action. Okay? And, okay, so I got sound. So normally this would be coming back. And so the only server-side code would be from here all the way down to here with my access check. The rest of this would be coming from server-side. It would be coming in JSON, and I'd be parsing that and stuffing that into session. Okay, that's just letting you know. I'm just showing this in pieces because it's easier to show it in pieces than rather everything. And so this is what it did. So that's my access, and then this is show hide. So I'm going to find everything that with a div of type data roles. And we'll talk about this data roles in a minute. This is important. This is an HTML5 feature. You're going to loop through. You're going to do an each. This is jQuery. And you're going to find it. And then you're going to say if the access is not authorized, at least for one role, I'm going to just attach. I'm going to get rid of this out of the DOM. Now that's a bit harsh. I can also do a show or a hide. The reason I don't want to do a detach really is because in real life, that gets it out of memory. That element's gone. You don't want to do this. I was just doing this for the demo. So you'd do a hide. You'd toggle like with a show or a hide. So that's what you'd really do. But this is enough to show for today. And then in the conditional test, the president, since I am the president role, I can only see this particular div. I do not see the member app at this point. So I'm going to just change this up and just see if this still works. I'm going to change it to be true and true. I want to show both for the president and the VP of membership. And let's just see if it shows up. It should, but let's just see. Yes, it did. So both are visible at this point. So this way you can do like a show hide. And let's go back into the HTML code. I forget the exact term for this because it's late. But there are custom data elements. Everything is data dash something, and then it's whatever you want to do. And that's really how jQuery Mobile looks like. I didn't show you much of the jQuery Mobile-based HTML docs we were showing earlier, but everything is data dash something, and then it's whatever you want to do for custom. So you can make your own custom data tags in HTML5, and that's what I'm exploiting and leveraging. You guys feeling kind of tired at this point? All right, so that's our back. And we're really done. So we've covered the architecture, we've covered requirements and prototyping, basics of PhoneGap, we've shown some implementation, things that you would do in any HTML5 app, a bit of security. And in the future, I'd be really starting to look at IndexedDB, WebSQL, and App Cache to make my applications a bit more sophisticated. And I'd also like to start getting into more dependency and package management with Volo and Grunt to automate some of this deployment, and also try to automate out some of the uglier pieces of PhoneGap so that I can set up automated builds. And finally, architecturally, I want to go more toward an MVC model, which we just didn't have time to cover today because that's a huge topic in and of itself. You'd almost have to do a brief intro to MVC and then cover one framework. So that wasn't the point of today's talk, but that's where I want to go in the future. So some final thoughts. You have lots of choices. Consider your options carefully. And of course, prove the architecture. Prove individual pieces. Get Hello World working for significant pieces. Keep things decoupled. Reduce dependencies. Care about your layers, your separation of concerns. I know you guys know this, but do this. You will be much happier. And just prove out the little pieces of the architecture like I was showing, the little user stories. So I want to leave you with one thought. And, you know, I'm a Java guy. I do Ruby on Rails. But what if? What if you got rid of, in .NET, you just got rid of ASP.NET and just did WCF and RESTful Web Services, and you let the client side do all the heavy lifting now of the model view controller? Or in Java, what if you got rid of JSP and just all you did was serve up RESTful Web Services? Or the same thing with Ruby on Rails. What if you just did away with served up server-side pages? I don't say that's good or bad, but what do you guys think about that? Because essentially, with doing that, you'd have the same model regardless of whether you've got a server-side app or not. It's very, very loosely coupled, and there's really no special between a website and a mobile app. It all works the same. It's the same code base. Furthermore, another nice thing about this is you don't have that disconnect anymore between your web designer and the person that is really good at HTML5 and JavaScript and the people that do .NET or the people that do Java or the people that know Ruby on Rails. Because frequently I'll get a good JavaScript guy, but he doesn't know anything about ERB files and Ruby on Rails, or he won't know JSP, he won't know ASP.NET. If we kept it all in one stack on the client side and kept everything client side and just let the server do the heavy lifting of just transactions, database management, messaging, what have you, and just had these loosely coupled endpoints with REST, imagine. I think it'd be a better world, but I don't know, I haven't tried this on architectures. I just want you guys to think about it and see if maybe this is a good direction for architecture or not. I don't make any recommendation, but I'd like you at least to consider it. So what's the point? Enterprise class mobile applications need an architecture, and PhoneGap does help you make it easier. Thanks a lot for your time, guys. And I have my resources back here.